When Haiti was hit by a devastating earthquake on January 12th, Rotarians from the New York City area immediately jumped into action. Jim Kushner, past president of the Inwood Rotary Club in Manhattan, organized a relief group including Soledad Kaplan, also from the Inwood Club, Bill DeLong from the Rotary Club of New York, and volunteer Andrea Schiffman, a local businesswoman from Queens. Together, they flew down to join Todd Shea, founder of the Comprehensive Disaster Relief Services, who had already set up a base outside of Port-au-Prince. Here is their story.
I had no idea what to expect. You know, I'd seen some images on TV, I'd heard about some of the facts on the radio, but you just can't imagine yourself actually being there and what you're gonna see. But we did have to drive with our truck through one of the areas that had been quite severely hit. And that's where we really did start to see a lot of people out on the street, a lot of buildings that were half rubble or completely flattened. It was the next morning when we came down to the camp that was just where you could really see it, and you really saw what the effect of the earthquake was. Everyone out in the street, nobody was staying in their building anymore. Even people who had a house that remained standing, they didn't want to enter into their houses. They thought, you know, they'd be sure to fall down. There were still aftershocks. The morning after we arrived, there was a big aftershock. The neighbors next door just started screaming and screaming. And we all ran out and found out nothing had actually happened, but people were felt so unsafe. They knew that it wasn't safe to be inside their homes. And that's what we saw in the streets too. A lot of structures were still standing, but everybody was sleeping outside. Everybody was outside of their homes. And then of course there were the tent cities. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people in these tent cities living just squished together under tents. The family whose house we stayed at was actually, they run an organization called Haiti. The organization was there, they had already been established from before the earthquake, but they were there now to help with the earthquake. They had a fenced-in amusement park that used to house some rides and some little areas, food and tents. And since the park was outdoors, most of it had remained standing. In other words, the gazebos were there. There were no buildings that had come crushing down. That's where our park was. So immediately the next morning, we drove to the park and started to set up this, quote, medical camp. And what that was the gazebos that did remain standing, we would use one as a surgery tent, one as a triage tent, another one as a communications tent. And they started letting the patients in, and that's where that was the real shock. People were being carried in by their family members with wounds that hadn't yet been treated at all. Just horrible, horrific, gaping, open wounds that people had sustained from concrete falling on them, from their houses falling on them.
They were awake when the surgeries were occurring, you know, with very little pain medication.
It was haunting because the patients, they know they needed help, but they knew they were being treated by doctors, but it was so terrifying and so agonizing for them to have their wounds, these deep wounds, cleaned, sometimes reopened, because what would happen is after a few days, after a week, the wounds would start to close and a layer of skin would start to form. But underneath that layer of skin, there were still pebbles, there were infections.
Right.
So these poor doctors, God, these brave doctors, I was there basically, well, translating, but also holding the patient's hand. And I've never felt such a strong, I just wanted them to feel better. You know, how can you do that? How can you just, so I would tell them, breathe, just breathe. You know, I have no medical background, but the patients didn't know that, and I didn't want to give them the wrong instructions, so I would say breathe, just breathe, and they'd look at me and then try to breathe.
You know what was the greatest thing is the smiles afterwards, and the people that were, the Haitian people that were in the camp volunteering, just waiting for food and were just there waiting for work. I didn't speak the language, but they had such a wonderful smile, you know, and they knew our names like within 2 seconds, and they were like smiling at us and saying "Soledad," you know, every morning with big smiles and very happy. So seeing the horrific part and also the humanitarian part is like such, you know, made it so worthwhile being there.
Everyone seemed to have a breakdown at some point. And I know I had it. A woman who came in, she was an elderly woman, but she was, you could tell she was normally in good health. She came in with, again, one of the horrific gashes, this one just covering the entire lower part of her leg. And at that point, we had a little surgery room, but it wasn't really a room. It was the back part of our surgery gazebo that was separated by a sheet that we had hung up from the rafters. And we had a table, an actual surgery table, as opposed to the air hockey table we'd been using. We had lots of good doctors, we had more instruments, and we had pain medication, but unfortunately not the morphine yet, not the ones that we should have had. And they had to go, her leg was not only lacerated, but it was fractured. It was just a horrible sight. And as they were cleaning it, the woman first started yelling. We say ow when something hurts. In Creole, they say why, why, why. So you can imagine it sounds like they're asking why. And I just get goosebumps thinking about it. The entire rest of the day, I couldn't even open my mouth without tears coming out. I couldn't function. You know, there I was trying to interpret for somebody else. I couldn't do it because I was crying, so I went up to Soledad. And I said, Soledad, I can't stop crying. What can I do?
As soon as I started to get emotional, I would go on the side and try, you know, and wear sunglasses. I tell you to wear those. You're saying, she's like, use those sunglasses, you know. They're important because you could hide your tears. The shelter boxes arrived on Saturday. They were incredible because they helped house the doctors, and then we could use them to, if the patients needed to stay and be followed up until the next day, they were staying in the shelter box. You know, they were used as, they were doing surgeries in them as well, right? Yeah, in 2 or 3 they were doing surgery, and also they were good to keep the patients from the sun. So there was nothing in the box that the people couldn't use. Okay, I felt very proud to be in Haiti representing the Rotary Club of Inwood, knowing Jim Kushner, who started the Rotary Club in Inwood and who was so motivated to provide services in Haiti. It makes me proud to be a Rotarian.
I'm glad I had this time to speak a little bit about my experiences in Haiti. Nothing could have prepared me for what I actually saw, for what I actually experienced. And I want people to know that, you know, thank God for groups like the Rotary Club, like CDRS, that are full of people like myself that care but want to go and help also. And most importantly, it's not over yet. Don't forget, Haiti is still there and still needs your help.